Welcome to episode 18 of the Cancer Pod. In this podcast, we're still at the movies. Today we're reviewing In Defense of Food, a documentary from 2015. I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser, and I'm a vegetarian.
And I'm Dr. Leah Sherman, and I'm not.
And we're two naturopathic doctors who practice integrative cancer care.
But we're not your doctors.
This is for education, entertainment, and informational purposes only.
Do not apply any of this information without first speaking to your doctor.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast by the hosts and their guests are solely their own.
Welcome to the Cancer Pod. Hey, Tina.
Hey, Leah, we got a good one today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this movie. So I think we should just get to it.
Let's talk about it.
Okay, so this is the second film that we're watching in our At the Movies pod, where we're talking about health-related films that are out there, available for people to watch.
Yep.
And we're talking today about In Defense of Food.
Yes, In Defense of Food. Came out a few years ago.
Yeah, and it's based on a New York Times bestseller.
By Michael Pollan.
Yeah, and I guess we'll talk about what we liked about the movie, if there was anything we didn't like about the movie, and then we'll kind of sum it up.
Yeah. Can I just do a spoiler? I love this movie.
I know, me too. And, after watching that first movie and then watching this movie, oh my gosh. I know, like we're just cutting to the chase.
I kind of made fun of the bobblehead idea in the first critique that we did on the other movie that I didn't like much at all, and how they used lowbrow tactics to make a point. And I was a bobblehead in this movie, but mostly because I've been doing this over 20 years with people, and everything that they said in here, I was like, yes, exactly.
I mentioned to you earlier, I think that the message in terms of health, both movies are kind of trying to, the first movie is trying to be the second movie, but the second movie is a hug. It's not a hit over the head.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Positivity.
Positivity. And the experts that they had were academics, right?
People who actually study this stuff and are willing to change their mind if the data goes another direction. They're not people who have built a career based on some ideology.
Right. I mean, there was somebody a professor of food behavior. Who knew?
I know.
I'm so fascinated by so many of the people. The author who writes about fat, how she started a diet of omega-6 fatty acids, just to see like what would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so skipping ahead.
I know. Okay.
So it's kind of starting at the beginning. The movie is organized. Mm-hmm. It's nice because it's like a book. It's in chapters, right? So they start with the Western diet and talking about what the issues are with the modern diet, which they don't call standard American. They call it the Western diet.
Mm-hmm. Which is how it's referred to in most studies.
Right.
So that is more in keeping. Maybe it's because they want the standard American diet to become what they propose, right? Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't solidify the idea of it being a standard American diet. By the time you finish this movie, if you eat the way they guide you to eat, then that should be the new standard.
Exactly. That's perfect. So they talk about the correlation between diet and type 2 diabetes, especially in children, right? They focus on Anthony, who's this cute kid who is having health issues. And that's kind of where the movie starts off. And they go into the whole thing about the government subsidies of, certain food.
Yes.
The corn and the wheat.
And they did a good job explaining the scientific reality of why processed food doesn't go bad, because you pulled all the nutrients out so it doesn't rot or spoil because nothing can live on it.
That was a really good point, because it's like, why did they start stripping the nutrients that were in bread? Why did they start removing them? Because it was a form of preservation so that you don't have to constantly have fresh bread around. And then they talked about why they started fortifying food, because all of those nutrients were being stripped and people were getting sick. And so they put those nutrients back in, which, seems a little absurd.
It's absurd. And we don't know all the nutrients. I mean, the problem is it's a lot of hubris as well. Like, oh, we'll strip it down and then we'll just add back certain ones. We only know certain ones. Even when they were doing it, they hadn't even discovered some nutrients at that time.
Right. They were putting back mostly the ones. And I'm not saying fortified food is bad. I'm just saying you're taking something out and then you're putting part of it back in. Like it's just to me, that just doesn't work in my head.
Right. From a completely rational perspective, it doesn't make sense.
Right. And they talked about other nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, which are found in green plants, and a healthful ratio of omega-6, which are also found in plants.
You want to know something interesting? Little factoid?
Yes.
There's higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids in plants that are grown in cooler weather and colder weather. Just like cold water fish have higher omega-3s.
Ooh.
So your kale, you can keep growing kale all year round in certain parts of the country. Winter kale will have a little bit more omega-3 than your summer kale.
So with the omega-3 fatty acid that's found in green plants, is that bioavailable to everybody?
That's a good point. So omega-3 fatty acids, if you are genetically from a heritage that ate a lot of fish, it's possible that you don't convert that last step.
Is that the connection? It's the fish connection?
Yeah. So, like someone of Japanese descent, for example, there was a lot of fish traditionally throughout the millennia eaten because it's an island. So they're less likely to convert omega-3 fatty acids in the plant down to the DHA that is needed than someone who is landlocked and has been vegetarian.
So that is interesting. It's good to know that many people can get omega-3 fatty acids from plants.
Yeah, and again, if you're from a heritage that has a lot of fish consumption, your enzyme to convert it is less likely to be active, or it'll be inefficient. So just keep that in mind, I guess.
Just try to find all sources.
Yeah, if you happen to be vegan and you are of a heritage that ate a lot of fish, you can get DHA from algae. So you can go to where the fish got it.
Just go straight to the source.
Just go right to the source.
Oh, and they do talk about the influence of sugar on the liver, the fructose and the liver damage.
Yes, it gets packaged up as a triglyceride, deposited in the liver, and that is how you get a fatty liver. So it's sugar that causes a fatty liver.
It's not fat.
They don't talk about that specifically, but it's, that's part of the whole picture of diabetes and blood sugar abnormalities is a fatty liver.
Right. And they did talk about other foods that convert in your body to this sugar and the effects of those foods in general on like lower income neighborhoods and how those foods are marketed to them. If you go into a store in certain neighborhoods and there's just all this junk food and how it's marketed towards certain population.
Yeah. Again, they wrapped that up into a hopeful message, which I appreciated. They didn't just present the problem. They said, and they didn't even present the problem. They presented the hopeful story.
I loved that. I loved how they're making those pizzas and, they're like putting all these different vegetables. And the one kid is like, I'm putting pickles on here.
Yeah.
I think it'll be good or something. Like it was so cute. And I'm like, pickles would be good on pizza because we put kimchi when we make pizza. So that's a pickle. I mean, like, why not? I'm going to make a pizza with pickles.
That's awesome. No, I liked that approach in this entire movie, which was they would tell you the problem, but by giving you the solution to the problem and the problem at the same time.
Yes.
Instead of kind of taking a cheap shot and saying, this is a tragedy, like doing the don don don.
And it is a tragedy, but they presented the solutions and the solutions were wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely fabulous. Like the teacher where he saw like opportunities to put in community gardens and stuff. Yeah. I mean, there were so many like examples of the great stuff that they were doing.
And the take-home message of the whole thing is ultimately that you need to change the culture, that our problems are deep-seated, and it's not just going and buying organic. It's a much more pervasive and systemic problem.
And they actually, because of the experts who were contributing to the movie, so the second part was the lessons from nature, right? And they looked back at cultures that are very similar to what the more westernized cultures were originally. And they looked at what they were eating. They looked at the hunter-gatherers and showing the lower rates of the diseases that are so prevalent in the Western world.
Right. And,
they're eating meat. And sometimes they don't eat meat. If meat's available, they eat meat. They eat a lot of meat.
Right.
And then they don't for a while. But it's, that they were eating a root.
Yeah, they were digging up a tuber.
A tuber, right. And eating that. So I don't know. I thought all of that was really interesting because they were talking to anthropologists. I mean, just everybody they were talking to just provided so much education.
Genuine expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I would call it genuine expertise was used. That same group, the Hadza in Tanzania, they circle back to them at the end of the whole thing, right? And talk about how that hunter-gatherer native diet, it may be the closest thing we'll have to knowing what our diets looked like before we introduced large agriculture and processed food. So they're studying their biome, their microbiome to say, what does that diet do? But that's way later in the show. But anyways, I like how they came back to them.
Mm-hmm.
They did that with several of the storylines.
And speaking of microbiome and probiotics, I also found the part about how when formula first was developed, which I didn't realize it was developed as far back as it was. I thought it was a 20th century thing,
mm-hmm.
but how they didn't even know of nutrition. And then later through research, finding out that there are these undigestible sugars
mm-hmm.
in breast milk, and then taking them and finding the specific bacteria in a baby that feeds off of it. That's so cool.
Yeah.
There are no mistakes in how we are designed.
Right. Right. Because that whole idea was looking at breast milk as a perfect food. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the baby can sustain itself on that, and then trying to break down and say, if that's the case, then what is in it? Because everything in it should be essential. That was a great story of Bifidobacterium infantis.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. Another really cool part is that last part of the movie where it's like, what can we do? Again, they're offering a solution. And that's broken down into, I guess, the catchphrase,
mm-hmm.
Michael Pollan catchphrase, right?
Which is?
Eat food, mostly plants, and not too much.
That's it.
That's so simple.
It's it. And I know that you and I have talked about this. In my practice, I've always had a bit of an aversion to the nutrition discussion. And I feel like it's a waste of their dollars because it's really simple. The only thing I would add to that is I also add, look at your heritage and what they ate. Eat what your ancestors ate. Eat whole foods, real food, mostly plants, and don't overeat.
And they kind of touch on that because they do say, don't eat any food that your great grandmother wouldn't recognize as food.
Good point. Yeah.
So they kind of touch on that, not saying necessarily eat what your great grandmother would eat, but,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this has always been a struggle. There's better ways of spending your time with me. You can just do this on your own.
Oh, yeah. And for me, I light up. I mean, that's why our team dietitian and I would do our appointments together because we would just feed off each other. Like, and I originally wanted to be a dietitian.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I've ever confessed that, but, and then found my way into naturopathic medicine. But yeah, nutrition was definitely where I wanted to go. And I love to cook and I love to find solutions. If people like to eat a certain thing, let's find a more healthful version, like I love that problem solving. So I like the food conversation. Yeah. So, and they talked about nutritionism, which I thought was such an interesting term, right? So it's like, instead of thinking of food as a whole, it's just picking that one thing out. So when you look at food in the store, they're like, this with more antioxidants, this with more vitamin D or whatever it is,
right.
And that's considered nutritionism, right?
Yes. I've never used the word and I hadn't come across it.
And that might be that might be a Michael Pollanism, but it's such a great way of looking at it. It's like these foods that are like, you don't ever see an apple in a store saying like, now with more fiber, with more apple.
Well, and the whole reason to call it nutritionism was he used that and was using that as an analogy for an almost religious fervor and a religious experience because you create mystery behind it, which is true. People feel like there's mystery behind nutrition, and now they must go to an interpreter. You need, in his case, I think he said in the movie, you come to me, or you go to a doctor, and we're your go-between between that mystery and explaining it to you. You need us, right? And again, it might be part of my issue with the whole thing is like, don't ask me about nutrition, just eat really good food, and enjoy it.
But then you have to, you do have to explain to people what really good food is,
yes.
Because what they have grown up eating, thinking is really good food, may not actually be it. And that was the thing with the little boy, right? His mom was like, I bought food I thought was healthy, right?
Yeah.
They were buying granola bars, they were buying yogurt, but maybe it was like they held up at one point that yogurt that had like M&Ms in it, but it's yogurt. And so you think it's healthy,
Sure.
so I do recall the challenge of trying to have people who are eating yogurt shift away from the fruit on the bottom or the fruit on the top or, whatever. It's hard to kind of change that mindset that this marketing and advertising has created.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, I think that it's hard to jump from conventional marketed foods to health foods and back. In other words, if you're always eating healthfully, your taste buds are different than if you're jumping in and out of, you're eating healthfully sometimes out of duty, but you're still going back to processed foods where it's too sugary and it's too salty and it's over processed. And what they put in there are some chemical compounds that are, light up your brain, little reward centers in your brain and stuff. You can't jump back and forth. And so I think that's the one thing I would emphasize that's not in the movie is like, give it time. Like you can't go from M&M laden yogurt to plain yogurt and expect to enjoy the plain yogurt. Your taste buds won't let you.
Right. No. And then right. And those were things that I helped along with the dietitian to help patients to transition to.
Yeah.
And, I liked the fact that they did touch on the trans fats. As being a bad thing. And like they talked about the origin of low fat back in the 1950s.
What a disaster that was.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say it was a good simplification of saying here was the proportion of fat. Here was the proportion of, sugars and carbohydrates that people ate. And then when we came out, we being the government, not me, when the government came out and started saying, oh, no, we got to trim down the fat intake. Instead of people trimming down their fat, they ate the same amount of fat, but just increased their carbohydrate intake. So we took in more calories ultimately.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what they say as well is like, serving size. And you were saying that when we were talking offline about the first movie was like, nobody ever mentions serving size.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
It is a big deal.
Yeah. The first movie demonized every bit of meat, but they didn't talk about proportion. Because yes, meat can be bad for you in excess, for sure, no doubt.
And because I kept like doing my little online research, I found a blog where the author had looked at Joy of Cooking from like the 1940s or whenever it first came out to Joy of Cooking, the modern version. And there were recipes that were the same, but the serving size was different.
Oh.
So hasn't been verified. I have not looked at old versions myself and compared it to new versions, but I just thought that in itself is really interesting because if you think about, I remember as soda sizes kept getting larger and larger.
Yeah.
Like the original size of a soda can, and that would be like 2 servings. I think a soda can used to be 2 servings. So a 12-ounce can would be 2 servings. And now you look at like a 16-ounce and that's considered 1 serving.
Yes.
So serving size, whether it's a drink or it's the plates, right? They had the experiment where they looked at the serving a person would give themselves based on the size of their plate.
Yeah. Yeah. So the simple thing of just looking at your dinner plates and sizing them down, getting smaller plates, that one little act in this movie, he talked about it could be the difference between, gaining 9 pounds or not over the course
in a
of
year, 9 pounds in a year by eating off of a smaller plate.
Yeah.
It was a significantly lower amount that they served themselves when they went from this large plate to the small plate.
Yeah. So in that scene, they didn't know they got a smaller plate to get seconds. They did this little trick where they stalled and then gave them all clean plates again. They all thought they got the same size plate, but it was a smaller plate. So when they went and got more food, yes, the smaller plate meant smaller portion because that's what our eyeballs do, right? So we'll cover a quarter of the plate or a third of the plate with whatever, So it's a little mind game we could play with ourselves, I suppose.
Yeah. And, if you do look at vintage dinnerware, you see how much smaller it is.
Yeah. Classic is juice glasses. A juice glass used to be like 3-4 ounces. Like old juice glasses are these little tiny things. And now,
Do they even have juice glasses now?
I don't know if they have them anymore, but if you go to a restaurant and you go out to breakfast or something, they give you a big old 8-ounce glass of whatever.
Well, I remember when I was in college and we'd go to the school cafeteria and they had these tiny little, I think they were like juice glass sizes. And you'd see the athletes would get like 6 of them full of milk or soda. But yeah, they did. The cafeteria came with these tiny little things. I mean, it's not like that anymore, right? You can just go get a 16-ounce, 20-ounce, whatever. But I like how the film, they talked about the Seventh-day Adventists.
One of the classic long-lived
Populations?
Populations. So they're also a population that they made it into that book, The Blue Zones. Remember that book?
I've heard of it. I've not read it. Yeah, I've heard
It's
of
just
it.
the several regions around the world that have extraordinary longevity in their populations. And that Seventh-day Adventists were one of the populations in that book as well. And they've been studied for a long time because of their longevity.
They live into their 90s.
Healthfully into their 90s, yes.
Right.
Yes. In this particular movie, they show them playing ping pong and doing a 4-mile walk at 92 years old. I mean, that's very different than just making it into your 90s.
Literally living into your 90s.
Yeah.
Not existing into your 90s.
Truly living.
Yeah. So they talked about how every additional serving of fruits and vegetables that you have each day can reduce your risk of certain diseases like stroke and heart disease.
By 4 or 5%.
Yeah. I mean, that's
for a serving.
That's big. And that was a way that I will often approach with patients. Like instead of taking things out of a diet, let's try adding something in, right? You just add in something that's healthful instead of like starting off by depriving someone of something that they enjoy. But let's add something in.
And just for the record, when you lower someone's stroke risk by 4 or 5%, it doesn't sound like much, but we're talking one serving. And I can tell you now there are drugs that are FDA approved to prevent a second stroke that do a lot less than that.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they only reduce the absolute risk by 2%. And they still are out there, and they're much more dangerous than another serving of broccoli.
All right, so we're back, and we're talking about in defense of food. And so far, we're loving it.
Love it.
If you missed the first part of this podcast, which I don't know how you did, we are loving this movie. The philosophy is basically eat food, mostly plants, and not too much. And so we're kind of talking about now the not too much part. We touched on it actually before because we talked about portion size.
Right. And we overeat, plain and simple.
And a lot of that is because the availability of food, and I'm going to put food in quotes because it's not necessarily nutrition that's available. It's processed packaged foods.
Right.
But it's everywhere. You know, they showed, we eat on the run, right? We're walking down the street. There used to be social taboos against doing that. You didn't walk down the street drinking a soda, or you didn't eat in public. And now it's just so acceptable to eat when you're driving. I
can remember growing up, you were not, just like that woman said in the movie, you were not allowed to bring food into the store. You literally put it down outside or finished it.
I still did that up until a few years ago. I mean, I still was like, oh, I got to finish my coffee or whatever before I go into a store. I still was like that. And now you see people going in.
That was really interesting because I was like, you're right. I kind of forgot we used to leave it outside or not go inside with it. Our new social norm is it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But that was good, showing people eating everywhere, eating on the run. They're walking down the street. They're eating. They're like, there's no time that you're not eating. It's not like an event anymore.
Right. And that was part of what they later say, eat more like the French. And it's because they eat on a schedule. Mm-hmm. They were very scheduled in how they're eating.
Right. And there was a gentleman who even said, to the French, food is a celebration with others, which I thought, that's exactly it.
Right. You spend a lot of time at the dinner table talking, socializing. I mean, I see even with myself, like I do spend more time cooking and then I eat it and then it's done.
Right.
And that was another thing that they had mentioned was spend as much time eating the food as you do preparing it. And I don't do that.
Right. Just being present and sitting there and actually being conscious, not looking at your phone, not looking at a TV, but being present with the food and actually tasting it.
Right. I thought what was really cool is when they went into schools and they changed how food appeared on the line, right? That was pretty cool. The lunch line. Yeah. You put the fruit and the vegetables first. And then like next to the register, you put a basket of apples because that would be like the incentive, right? Like places you go and right by the register. That's all of the impulse purchase. That's where the candy bars and the dessert things come. But instead you put apples. And I can't remember what the amount of carrots that they went from serving.
From 25 to 75 pounds.
Of carrots.
In a week. By just pushing the carrots to the front of the line. So the kids are hungry. And when you're hungry, you start grabbing food. You grab the carrots, put it on your tray because it's the first thing you see. But if it's the last thing you see, you might not.
Right. And so, they were saying serve vegetables first, which, with the French, they actually finish their meals with a salad. So I was like, I don't think I want to finish my meal with a salad. I always grew up where you eat the salad first. So, but still, whatever works, as long as you got a salad there or some sort of vegetable.
Right.
Stop eating before you're full.
This is a classic tool too. I think I know in some Asian cultures, they say stop when you're 80% full. You should push away from your table. That's
an Ayurvedic, I don't want to say rule, but that's what I learned when I was studying Ayurveda, is don't eat until you're full.
And if the portion sizes are smaller, it's going to happen naturally. And if you do mostly plants, it's also going to happen naturally because it takes you longer, especially if it's well prepared and you're taking your time to eat. You get more full as you go along.
Eating slower for sure, because if you're eating slower, you put down your fork. I'm completely I think this is the hardest thing for me. I used to be a very slow eater and I don't know what happened along the line, but somehow my full meter just went away. I was in my 20s. I remember going to a restaurant with friends and everybody was giving me what they couldn't finish. And it was funny because I was so freaking skinny that they thought it was funny that I would just keep eating and eating and eating. And my friend John had to actually carry me out of the restaurant because I was so full. So horrible. I mean, so I've been, I don't have that meter, but if you chew slowly and you put down your fork, and it's something that you have to train yourself to do if it's just not in you.
Yes, I agree. You have to get in some kind of habit where putting down your fork is one of those things for sure, because that forces a certain amount of time between bites. I've always been a slow eater. Actually, most of my memories when I was little, everyone would leave. My mother would be cleaning the kitchen. I'm still at the table eating. My siblings would be all long gone.
And I think I started that way. I do think that when you start working and eating at your desk and you're just trying to get I think that, or standing at the stove, eating right out of the saucepan.
I'm so guilty of that, of lunch hours being, something else I'm doing at the same time. I'm so not conscious of what I'm eating. Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of it started.
Room for improvement.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this movie was really inspirational. What I did find was there was a period where I really, really monitored my portion size and how fast I was eating. And it made a big difference on my acid reflux.
Oh, okay. You mean controlling your portion size?
Controlling portion size.
Okay.
And eating slower. So I know we're going off the subject of the movie, but I just want to say it can help with so many more things.
Yes. What I also agreed with in this movie is your body can handle a little bit of breaking the rules once in a while. You don't have to think yourself all the way into the perfect diet, where there is a condition out there now called orthorexia, right?
Right.
This disordered eating that you think that there's some orthodox way you must eat to be healthy, and you obsess about it to the point of it being a pathology.
Right.
I mean, I've seen that. I fear that for some people, especially people who have a history of eating disorders earlier in their lives. They're more prone to it. So we have to be careful when we talk about diet. So I liked that forgivable nature of this message in defense of food. It said, you can break the rules once in a while. Every once in a while, you can go crazy.
Have something that you enjoy.
Yeah. It's a special event. It's, whatever it is. Not even that you enjoy, but something you wouldn't normally eat. So I don't know.
Have your chocolate, have your soda, every once in a while, have something that might not.
Yeah. I'm thinking of someone in your family makes some dish they used to eat as a kid in the 70s. That's really not good for you, but they made it and it's special. And you're visiting with this relative, a grandparent or whatever. You sit down and just eat it and be nice and play along.
Oh, I'm thinking about when I go to a taco cart and I get one of the Mexican Coca-Colas and my husband and I will split it, that's my treat.
Yeah.
I go and I have tacos from a cart.
Perfect.
And I have a Coca-Cola, and it happens maybe at the most 4 times a year. But yeah, I mean, I saw it as a treat. And, growing up, that's what fast food was for us. Fast food was a treat.
Yes.
And now it's kind of a way of life for some.
Yeah. It's almost I think of fast food as devoid of any nutritional value, really, in my mind. And so, it affects your biome in your gut, not in a good way. So can your body handle that once in a while? I don't know, once every 3 months or 6 months or something? Sure, you can recover from that. The problem is when people get in a habit and they're that's what they do every day, or you do it consecutively enough that your gut really suffers. I mean, your biome will change depending what you put in your mouth. And so if we really go off the rails in a dedicated way, day in and day out, then you're really going to change your gut. It's not hard to recover. It's just you have to eat well to maintain a good biome.
Yeah. And I think, the movie did really address the importance of the microbiome. They compared the colon cancer rates in Africa
Yes.
Versus Blacks in the United States and changing their diets, right? Didn't they swap the diets out and they just saw the changes in the microbiome?
Yes.
These were in healthy people. These were not in people who had cancer, but
Right.
they just took healthy people from the US and then from Africa and swapped their diets. And within a couple of weeks,
Yes.
the microbiome had changed.
Yeah, so that's another example of going back to the diets our ancestors ate wherever we hail from. It gets tough because we're kind of mixed genetics.
And those government subsidies were, as the other movie talked about, how these products like corn would be marketed to everybody, advertised as why you should eat it. This movie touched on how it's also used kind of, I don't want to say on the down low, right? They took corn and made it an additive to food. So it's like high fructose corn syrup would be an additive that is made from corn. When you read all of those terms on the back of your packaging, a lot of those things come from corn, soybeans, wheat, and rice.
Yes. So it's kind of like ethanol in our gas tank. In other words, we found an outlet for the growers and the government subsidizes some of this. Like some of it's all just happening on a level that has nothing to do with health at all. But it's just
right. But it's not an in your face thing. It's not like got milk where it's being thrown at you. It's just being put in there without your knowledge, if you're not reading labels.
Yeah. What I liked about this movie is it didn't say the players who are partaking in any of this are in any way not ethical themselves. It is a system that's been with us for so long that even if you're part of this, you're a grower or you are, I don't know, like we're all part of this system where the government has in the background influenced our food industry in a way that's created more processed food and more ultimately, food devoid of nutrients.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Nutrient-free food.
Yeah. All right. So all in all, we felt quite differently about this one than we did the first movie. Fair to say.
Yes, absolutely. So this movie isn't without controversy. Remember the plate guy, Brian Wansink, the guy from Cornell?
Yes.
So in 2016, which is after the movie came out, his research was brought into question. And in 2017, like 4 of his papers went under review. There was this whole like BuzzFeed expose on him. And basically a bunch of his papers were retracted and he resigned from his position in 2018.
Okay. Yeah. It's a big problem out there.
Right. And it's hard because a lot of people over the years have used his data and his information to talk about nutrition. So that was a little upsetting to learn that this is what happened since the movie was, the book was written and the movie was released.
And was this because he admitted that the data was made up or they just couldn't find the data? He couldn't bring it out.
Right.
Show them this is what we did.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that's not the only controversy. The anthropologist that worked with the Hadza in Africa, there's question regarding his credentials, if he's actually has a doctorate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what I initially looked up was, I was like, oh, I'll just post a link to his website. And then I uncovered that there have been multiple sexual assault allegations against him. And then I learned from looking online and seeing on science.org that he does not hold a PhD. Yeah. So there is some question of the validity of his evidence that he collected, and the organizations that he was involved with, they like kind of dismissed him. So he's not involved in all of that kind of microbiome research that is continuing. Again, that was found out the lawsuit came about in 2019.
Okay.
So that was after the movie was released, obviously after the book was published. But yeah.
Right. It's too bad. Well, and it's interesting because we're like real experts, right?
I know,
We got
right?
real live experts, and now, a couple of them completely discredited in the ensuing years.
Yeah. And I think it's really important because even though the both of us really, really love the message of this film, you still have to approach everything with that question, the little questioning mind. I think this is a really good lesson in that.
Right. It doesn't negate the information that they did. We don't know. Did the guy have a PhD or didn't he have a PhD?
Oh, and of course, the article even says we're not sure if he has an undergraduate degree.
So he is an imposter of sorts.
Possibly. But
this is interesting. Okay, so he's an imposter, but his data could be okay because the data is the data and the data stands on its own two legs.
Right.
The other guy really is a PhD, but his data could be bunk. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's just a weird, a weird little discovery. So on our rating scale of broccoli, what do you want to give the film?
I still give it 5 broccoli, even with those 2 unfortunate caveats to the whole thing.
Okay.
Maybe on its next meter, the scientific integrity meter.
You're going to knock it down a couple microscopes?
Well, I'll give it 4 out of 5 because, again, there's no evidence that the data is bad. It's just there's some question around it now. Yeah.
So I was originally going to give it 5 broccoli, and I think I'm going to just knock it down a broccoli. So I'm going to, I'll knock it down half a broccoli. So I'm going to give it 4.5 broccoli. And then, for the scientific integrity part, I'm going to give it 3 because I'm a hard ass.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. I felt deflated after learning some of that. Again, I don't believe Michael Pollan knew this at the time. This all came out afterwards.
Well, not even JAMA knew it because the Journal of American Medical Association is the one who printed his papers, and they have editors and an editor-in-chief and peer reviewers, and nobody knew it. It all got published before it got retracted. So I don't think anyone knew it when this particular documentary was made.
All right. So I guess that's it. That's our review on In Defense of Food.
So our next movie to review and discuss will be Super Size Me.
Yeah. And we've both seen that. That movie came out in 2004.
Yes.
So there are probably some people listening who have never seen that film. It is available to watch for free on YouTube, Pluto TV, Tubi. And then if you subscribe to Prime Video, it's on that as well.
Cool. Yes. I think a lot of people have seen it and know at least the gist of it. You can remember. But it'll be good. I'm going to rewatch it.
Yeah. So I will rewatch it as well because I haven't seen it since 2004.
It was kind of the first one in this genre.
Yeah.
One of the earliest ones.
Yeah, for sure. I want to quickly mention, because I didn't mention a song after the first one. If you did watch What the Health, hopefully you made it to the end and listened to a fabulous song that was by a band from Tulum, Mexico. And it's a traditional song called La Guanábana, which is a traditional fruit and soursop. But it's the song that ends the film. And that I forgot to mention, that was actually the best part of the film.
I would agree with you. The song at the very end was the best part.
Yeah. It was
I
really
like that
good.
song. Yeah. All right. So it's going to be up on our Spotify list?
I can't find their version, the band that was in the movie, but I will put a version of that song on our Spotify list. And I'm just going to say that's going to be the song for the whole series because I don't know.
There you go. All right. Sounds good to me.
It's easier that way.
Perfect. All right. On that note,
I'm Dr. Leah Sherman.
And I'm Dr. Tina Kaiser.
And this is the Cancer Pod.
Until next time.
See you at the movies.
Thanks for listening to the Cancer Pod. Remember to subscribe, review, and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media for updates. And as always, this is not medical advice. These are our opinions. Talk to your doctor before changing anything related to your treatment plan. The Cancer Pod is hosted by me, Dr. Leah Sherman, and by Dr. Tina Kaiser. Music is by Kevin MacLeod. See you next time.